So, you want to hear a story of love, the story of war, and the story of humanity? Well, let me tell you a story of a Kolistian king. Agent Lamar Taddison sat at the campfire surrounded by the Maxeldemian bards. The kingdom of Kolisto, words like soft, hedonistic, and naive comes to mind when people mention this kingdom, and yet it stands as one of the most powerful of human nations. Well, it is true that Kolistians are indeed an oddity in the geopolitical arena. They are pacifists who never experience hardships of manual labour, and never experience hunger or, to that matter, feared for their violent end to their lives. They are highly egalitarian people who look down on those who rise above others, so it is rather ironic that it was one great individual that paved the path for their carefree life. An aristocrat of one of the old and richest families from old Earth, Lord Matthew Buckingham, the first king of Kolisto. Like many human nations, the kingdom of Kolisto had its beginning in the days of the Great Divide. As Earth was scrambling its resources and once again learning the long-forgotten ways of war to defend itself against the invasion of an alien threat, its colonies were left alone to fend off for themselves. Many great leaders arose during these turbulent times, like Axel Vase, the founder of Corporate Confederacy, Emperor Victor MacArthur, the first emperor of New Terran Empire, Prophet Ike, and King Acosta Sankasant, who laid the foundations of Church of Light. Matthew Buckingham certainly stands, I dare say, best of all these people. Matthew was born on Kolisto, and spent his early childhood there as his family was among the first colonists to settle the planet. The Buckingham family was already one of the richest families in the United Earth Federation, and you can still find many of their numbers in Earth Society's circles and holding key positions in monarchist political parties. As was the custom, Matthew was sent to study in the most prestigious boarding schools, and later on in universities back on Earth. During this time, Matthew has shown a great thirst for knowledge and was a somewhat socially awkward kid. However, his thirst for knowledge was rather unfocused, and from time to time his grades slipped up. It was as if Matthew was searching for something in STEM fields and later switched on to more humanitarian fields like sociology and economics. To the great dismay of his parents, Matthew had shown little interest in participating in politics or business, as he much preferred the company of more academics and friends that were specialists in high-tech industries rather than managers and socialites. Eventually his parents decided to compromise. They took him away from Earth, with his friends away from all the politics and corporate maneuvering that he despised so much. In return, he would have to oversee the building of the Kolistian Academy. No expense was spared as to attract as many academics as possible from all fields, as is to buy the best equipment available and build the facilities. The natural beauty of the Kolistian mountain range where this academy was built attracted many students, and during the first year the student population outnumbered the entire population of the planet. That's when the calamity struck the United Earth Federation. The nomadic fleet of reptiloid raiders arrived in an otherwise lonely corner of the galaxy humanity occupied. Entire civilian fleets of FTL vessels were hunted down and cannibalized for parts, while populations of planets were taken as chattel for work as slaves and food. Like the scourge of locusts, they hunted first for human ships, and then would carve their path towards Earth. For decades, the UEF fought for its survival, abandoning all of its colonies that served no strategic value, and Kolisto was one of those colonies. Parents lost the reptiloids during their travels. Young Matthew found himself in charge of the colony of students and academics. My friends, it is quite clear that Earth has abandoned us, and I know all too well the pain that many of you experience, as I have lost my family as well, but we cannot give in to despair. We all must do our part for our common survival. Look around you people, we have everything that we need here. We have the knowledge and the technology to homestead anything. Not only can we survive, but we can thrive. King Matthew Buckingham, after 6 months of not receiving any communications from the rest of the human colonies or Earth itself. The first year was filled with many difficulties, from forced rationing to even some death due to exposure to the elements, as was the first time Matthew had to dispense justice. However, it was also the first year where the first harvest from a giant greenhouse was gathered. The days of rationing were over, and Matthew organised a massive fleet. Many began talking about calling the settlement the Matthew Town. Friends, I know Settlement 287 is a bad name for the little town we built, but to name it after me is just cringe. We are better people than that. I propose we name it after someone who is far more deserving than me. Someone who has proven one's worth to all of humanity many times over, even after death. And not some politician, but a scientist. I think we should call our town Einstein. With those words, the capital city of Einstein was renamed from Settlement 287. As the second year turned into the second one, and the first resemblance of the first multi-purpose, fully automated factory began taking its shape, people began wondering if that was it. They were the last human colony still alive. Friends, it has been 3 years since we lost contact with the rest of humanity. We need to find out what is happening out there. As such, I propose we focus all our energy and resources on building a rocket to take us back to space, and begin works on building a hyperdrive. It is not an easy task. That will require a lot from us. However, I also believe in undertaking this endeavour. We should not make the same mistakes as humanity did, as it slowly left its cradle on Earth. I understand that building spaceships worthy of FTL travel will demand a lot of resources, production of which may harm our planet. As such, I vow that we do it in the safest and non-harming way to our own ecosystem possible. We will not take shortcuts. We will do it right. It took another 7 years to build a rocket and hyperdrive for the citizens of Einstein. Over this time, under the careful guidance of Matthew, a new kind of economy was being built, as everyone was pitching in, one way or another, for a common task. The economy of abundance and highly automated zero-waste industry. Matthew, through the strength of his character, was doing what many dreamers of old Earth only dreamt of. He was building a post-scarcity society. Today, my fellow Kolistians, I stand proud to call myself one of you. Look around. We did something incredible here. We built a community based on mutual understanding, respect, and love for one another. A community that is a true testament to what humanity was always meant to be. Compassionate and sensible people, to whom the stars were promised, and this day we launch our first spaceship Icarus, in defiance of its myth. Agrippa, my old friend, go forth and see if our brethren are in need of help. Little did Matthew know that he was sending his old friend into the jaws of humanity, reverting back to their barbaric ways. Graveyards of ships. Icarus had returned 3 months later, scared, with only Agrippa Delons being the sole survivor of the crew. Once a fearless and hopeful captain, looked like a husk of his former self. He witnessed how once civilized people turned to cannibalism, slavery, and sadistic methods of control. He told the tale of asteroid miners turning to pirates. He told about how planet-side populations turned to superstitions and savage tribalism, and how none of the local systems knew what was happening to the rest of humanity. Yet the worst was yet still to come. Agrippa said that one of the most powerful pirate kings had FTL-capable ships, and after witnessing Icarus, a brand new ship that was also FTL-capable, he knew that this was his chance to expand his domain. A planet with industry capable of not only building ships, but also of hyperdrives full of fangless academics. A prey that would propel him to more than just a pirate king, but a conqueror. My fellow friends, we reached out for the stars to find our own brethren who have lost their minds. Turning to the worst impulses, and as much as it pains me to say it, but for all our progress, the animal within humanity still lives. We must turn to the tools of destruction to defend ourselves, but how can I ask of you to face this horror? No. I will not ask of you to take arms, but I do ask of you to build us an army and a fleet to defend ourselves. That's when Matthew turned the automated industry to start producing tools of war. By the end of the month, they had thousands of drones, bipedal robots, and a dozen of small AI-controlled warships ready to wage war. That's when the Pirate King and his fleet showed up to find his death. Next year, Matthew organized a second expedition with more and bigger ships, this time armed with powerful particle weapons and an army of robots under the command of a bunch of RTS gamers. Those were now aged students, who only were happy to finally put to the test their command abilities. It was an adventure of a lifetime for them, but Matthew knew they might return carrying the horrors with them, and as such began work on a mental health facility. The first patients were the pirates that were taken prisoner. Rehabilitation was a slow and long process, but many were soon proud and reformed citizens of Callisto, once again reminded what it meant to be a civilized human. Once again the expedition has returned, battered but not broken. The mighty fleet of Callisto had proven to be the greatest force in the sector. Many pirate kings were defeated, all local systems had sworn fealty to Matthew, and rumours of other FTL ships began surfacing. The expansion was in the zeitgeist of the people of Callisto. They were living proof that they can help everyone build a better society. Matthew now held an audience sitting on the white throne for different people under the protection of his fleets. You know, Agrippa, what has it been? 15 years since it all started, and I sit here staring at this PDA with Vase Industries branding. Axel Vase. I met him at the party, once arrogant bastard, thought he was smarter than everyone else in the room. But damn, already, then he has more money than in my allowance. And it was not like his parents' money. None of us even thought that we would be running our very own nations, and now to begin wondering if we will have to wage war against one another for the Dominion. Matthew spoke to his trusted admiral, surrounded by loyal subjects, only to hear the words of assured victory against misguided capitalists. Yet the question still remained what happened to the once great nation from which they have all hailed. The first government that managed to unite all of humanity under its flag. The question was soon to be answered as finally, the white ships of Callisto finally reached ruins of one of the oldest colonies, Zvezda. They saw the destruction born of alien weapons and feral tribes of survivors, who told the tale of monstrous reptiles that ate them alive and lay waste to defenses with unfathomable technology, and poisoned by destroyed chemical industries. Yet within the ruins of Zvezda was the tribe that dedicated themselves to the preservation of what was beautiful. Zvezda was once the biggest supplier of chemical products like fertilizers, different acids, and rare earth materials, all across human colonies. It was one of the few colonies that indeed was a contributor to the economy rather than a drain, thanks to more than a century of development. And over that time, became a cultural beacon and the place of a lot of contention as a new generation of colonists protested the industrial development of the planet. As futile as this attempt was, the planet became in many ways a place of pilgrimage for artists and environmental activists. I heard of you, Matthew Buckingham, the White King of Callisto and the Master of Machine Armies, the tyrant that wraps himself in noble deeds. Your so-called charms do not hide the lie that you are selling from me. I look at you and see the very same pirate kings with just better weapons and a bigger army. Your so-called artists spew propaganda, and your so-called generosity is nothing more than bread and circus you do to keep your people content. Seeing one narcissist, have seen them all. With those words, Arnista Longford greeted Matthew, once a young girl, that was at the Museum of Art when the alien Armada devastated the colony, and now a fierce leader of the Preservers. She was wary of anyone holding positions of power, for she has seen many, and read about even more. The Matthew's admirals and generals were rather taken aback by such bold words. Matthew was still calm. I am no enemy to your people. I only wish to bring at least some resemblance of order to the ruins of this once great world. Accept our authority, and your people will never go hungry, and once again the works of art will serve their true purpose to be seen. Matthew stood before Arnista, in his long white coat weaved with golden lines. Arnista, in contrast, was in some manner of drags, yet she still had this purple beret on her head, preserved in perfect condition. So what? You will take it away, as all imperial thieves did before you? Come into the ancient worlds and plunder them for their cultural heritage? She turned her face away from Matthew, as she looked up, as if she held a higher ground than him, despite being surrounded by a dozen heavily armed robots. How about this for a deal? I will clean up the planet, rebuild its cultural past. I will not take his artifacts back with me to Callisto, Matthew said, with a smile, wondering if that would be enough. Will you leave afterward? That's when she actually looked at Matthew. If I leave, then who will remain to protect all of what I have rebuilt? Matthew now stepped forward. Yet that's when his admirals began chattering among themselves in a worry. Zvezda was a price too sweet to pass up for another great force. The Corporate Confederacy showed up, and they were not going to be concerned about what the local tribes were thinking. They were here to exploit this world once again. Kolistian Fleet, Vase Industries claims this planet for Corporate Confederacy. We strongly suggest you leave this area, as you are outnumbered and outgunned. The message was broadcast all across the Zvezda. It was indeed true, the Corporate Confederacy indeed brought in a bigger fleet than what Kolistians had. Listen up, rich boy. You promise you fix the planet, and fend off those bastards, and you have yourself a deal. We will submit your rule. Arnista quickly realized that the other side was not big on the whole preservation business, as she extended her arm to Matthew. Done. Matthew grabbed her hand without a question. Admirals glanced at one another. This was a bad decision in many ways, and once they had suffered for the next month as the corporate fleet laid waste to Kolistian fleets and mercenaries, proved themselves far tougher opponents than a bunch of unorganized pirates to deal with. But over time, Arnista and Matthew grew closer, as both shared the harshness of war and the occasional philosophical debate. They were waiting for reinforcements, and when they came, so did the other corporations of the Confederacy showed up. But then, across all channels, a message was broadcasted using old Earth protocols. Unidentified vessels. You are in the United Earth Federation space. This is the one and only warning you will get. Leave or be destroyed. The message came from hundreds of ships that jumped out of hyperspace, matching in numbers both the Kolistian and corporate fleets present. What was once a nation that barely had any heavily armed vessels now was fielding a fleet of battleships, cruisers and destroyers. Tell the fleets to retreat, let the corporations deal with the Federation, then we can get the victor to the negotiating table. Such was the brilliance of Matthew. After another month of battles, the United Earth Federation proved itself victorious, as Federation tech had many new innovations that neither Kolistians nor the corporations expected to see, like artificial gravity and rudimentary shields. You made a smart choice, Matthew. Now we can talk about the reintegration of Callisto back into the Federation. The admiral that was in charge of the Federal Fleet turned out to be Ryan Buckingham, a long-lost cousin of Matthew. That is not going to happen, cousin, Matthew said, as he sat across the table from Ryan. The two shared many of the facial features, but yet were dressed so differently. One was in a regal high-tech white robe, while the other was in the grey uniform with chevrons on his shoulder indicating his rank. Excuse me? Ryan tried to pretend to be surprised, but he knew that he was no longer talking to a citizen of the Federation. He was talking to a king of a sovereign nation. The Federation is no longer the sole player in the arena. With Svesta, you only have about 20 systems under your control. Between the Confederacy and me, we can match you in fleet power, and have more territories under our control. If we rose up in those 15 years to what we are now, what else is rising out there, across 1,000 stars we colonized? Matthew said, not exactly pleased to say it himself. They were once one people, and now they stood there, looking over the map divided into three. Those pirate kings that Matthew defeated and subjugated were such ancient history now as giants came out to play. Centuries of peace, and in mere 15 years humanity learned how to wage war once again. The Great Divide. The Federation does not recognize your governorship as legitimate, and never will, Ryan said, looking at the map, realizing the same thing that Matthew did, as the future of humanity was once again defined by geopolitical struggles. How about that? I will clean up and rebuild Svesta for you, and you leave me alone. Matthew looked out at the door, knowing that Onista was somewhere out there, a so-called valiant tribe of preservers to be lost in the dustbin of history, crushed under the giants wrestling for control. We'll have to take it up with the Senate, but you do drive a hard bargain, Ryan said calmly. In the next 5 years, Matthew dedicated many of the resources to rebuilding and cleaning up Svesta, and then left. But he did steal one prize from the Federation. Onista, a love of his life that tempered his imperial ambitions and convinced him to utilize the AIs to help guide the future of the kingdom of Callisto.